Hello. My name is Derek Mosley. I'm the director of Marquette Law School's Lubar Center for Public Policy Research and Civic Education. And I want to welcome you to our Get to Know program, and it's sort of our face of the case. When lawyers, law students, judges, when we talk about cases, we typically relegate the case name down to just one name. Whether it's Terry from Terry versus Ohio, or it's Miranda from Miranda versus Arizona, or if it's Tinker, in Tinker versus Des Moines. And so I thought, when I was a law student, I thought it would be great if I could sit into a classroom and hear from John Terry in the Terry versus Ohio case, or hear from Eduardo Miranda in regards to that case as well. It'd be great to hear what they have to say instead of just talking about the case itself. And so that's what spawned this little part of our Get to Know programs. We do the Get to Know programs where we bring people in that affect your lives every day that you might not know. And this is the Face of the Case, where we try to bring in, this is our second Face of the Case program that we've held since I've been here. And we thought this one was pretty relevant, considering the time talking about First Amendment rights and speech rights of students, especially going on in the country today. You can't turn on the news or read the newspaper and not hear about it. So I wanted to introduce you to one of those faces of the case. So please join me in welcoming our guest today, Mary Beth Tinker.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mary Beth, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's so good to be with all of you at the Lubar Center and at Marquette Law School. So thank you for inviting me
Absolutely. We had dinner last night, and I told Mary Beth that I was completely fanboying at dinner. Because this is the thing that I like the most, is not just talking about the cases, but actually getting to see the people and learning about the cases. So thank you for taking part.
Oh, thank you for dinner.
Oh, yeah, no problem. And I know a few places. So I wanted to start. So in the 60s, your family lived in Des Moines, Iowa, correct?
Yes,
okay.
That is true.
So talk to me. How did you get to Des Moines?
Well, we came to Des Moines because my father, we lived in Iowa, in a small town in Iowa, Atlantic, Iowa, in the 1950s and early 60s. And there was a swimming pool. My father was a Methodist minister. And there was a swimming pool in town there where they did not allow black families to swim. And that was going on all over the country. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about this, and I'm sure it was true in Wisconsin as well. And so my parents believed that you should put your faith values into action. And it's called the social gospel. And some people believe that all gospel is really social gospel because you should always put your values into action. But my parents believed that. So when the swimming pool in town didn't allow black families, some of the teenagers at our church asked my dad to go with them and change that because he had taught them you should take action. Don't just sit by and watch when something's not fair. So he went with them, and they did get that changed. But, you know, there are always some people that say, well, life's not fair. Get used to it. And those kids didn't get used to it. And I tell kids, don't ever get used to it. I tell everyone, don't get used to it, because life should be fair. So they didn't get used to it. They went and they got that changed. But as a result, some people there in Atlantic, Iowa, got mad at my dad from the church, and he got fired from his job at the church for doing that. And they said, you know, Reverend Tinker, we just wanted you to preach on Sunday. We didn't want you going up to the swimming pool. And he said, well, I can't separate my life like that. I have to live my Sunday values every day of the week. And so he was fired from the church, and that's why we moved to Des Moines, Iowa, where he then had a new church, Epworth Methodist Church. And that's where I started kindergarten.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I have a picture up of your family, and that's pretty much, so how many siblings total do you have? Because I think someone's missing there.
I had 5 siblings, but one of my sisters was killed a while back in a bicycle accident. Yes, I'm sorry to say, Bonnie, my older sister. She was a real role model for me, but yeah, 5 siblings. Yeah.
And
big family.
What'd your mom do?
My mother was a teacher of educational psychology, and she had also had a religious background. She went to Catholic schools as a teenager, and then she sort of was involved with the church as far as education, church education. And so she did that. And then my father, as I said, was a minister, but he then later went to work for the Quakers. And he went to work for the American Friends Service Committee. And when I was about 10 years old, we started attending Quaker meeting. And so, he was very proud to be a Methodist, and he kept his, ministership, but we spent most of our time with the Quakers after I was about 10 years old.
Okay. Now, I saw in a couple of interviews, you mentioned a woman by the name of Edna Griffin.
Yes.
What did Edna Griffin mean to you, and who was she?
Edna Griffin was a hero in Iowa. She came back, she was a veteran actually, and she moved to Des Moines where she wanted to get something to eat and drink at the local drugstore and was not allowed because she was black. And so in 1959, I think it was, she won a case at the Iowa Supreme Court against segregation. And so when we moved to Des Moines, my mother and Edna Griffin got to be friends. And my mother, who had gotten somewhat involved with the racial justice movement, she was really from South Texas. And there was a minister when she was about 13 or 14 years old there in South Texas who taught the kids about segregation and taught them that it was wrong. And so she had been very much affected by that. So when we moved to Des Moines, she got to be friends with Edna Griffin. And we got to be friends with their family.
All right. And Edna does have a pretty storied history in the state of Iowa. I did a little research on her. She's a civil rights icon.
Yes,
actually.
She is.
Now, but I have a picture up of youth.
Yes.
And youth protesting things had an effect on you at a young age.
Yes, it did very much. And, a lot of times people feel safe in talking about the past. But connecting it to the future and to the present is what I like to do. And I speak with students all over the country every week, mostly by Zoom now, but sometimes in person. So these issues are very much connected to the present. But at that time, 1963, then up in Des Moines, we saw on the press, because of the free press, well, this case is about the First Amendment, the freedom to speech, the freedom of the press, the freedom to assemble, the right to have your own religion, and the government can't tell you what religion to have, and the right to petition. So at that time, 1963, the Birmingham Children's Crusade, that was about 2,000 black students in Birmingham, Alabama, who were standing up for racial justice. And when they did that, of course, the news of that went worldwide, kind of went viral. Oh, the great democracy. And here are these kids wanting to make it real. And that's the power of young people. They want to make these ideals real. And so they were in Birmingham, Alabama, and we saw them on the news, and we thought they were so amazing.
But not everybody was keen on this.
No, the white supremacists. And, I like to teach students about the white supremacists and that we still have plenty of white supremacists in our country today, as we know. They don't usually dress like this now. Now they wear more normal clothes, jeans, T-shirts, suits and ties, dresses, skirts, things like that. But back then, the white supremacists got really mad at the Birmingham children. And you can see movies about these events. One is called Four Little Girls. It's by Spike Lee. And so the white supremacists got really mad. Well, the Birmingham children had their protests in May of 1963. That August was the March on Washington, when Martin Luther King made his famous I Have a Dream speech. And then a couple of weeks later, the white supremacists in Birmingham, Alabama were really hopping mad, and they bombed the headquarters of the Birmingham children and killed these four little girls, Cynthia, Addie Mae, Carol, and Denise. So we were at a picnic in Des Moines after our church service when someone came by and told us about what had happened to these little girls. And of course, we felt really sad and angry. And then we heard about a way to take some action. And I'm a nurse, actually, and I've been a trauma nurse with teenagers and kids. I was a family nurse practitioner. I'm retired now. But I have learned that it really helps with those difficult emotions when you take some action. And so I like to tell kids about that, how you can deal with some of those stressful emotions you have. And I know there are a lot of law students with some stress right now because finals are next week. But, you know, when you take some action, it can help. And so we heard about a plan to take some action about this. And it was put out by James Baldwin, the writer, and a man named Bayard Rustin, who was a leader in the civil rights movement, who you don't always hear a lot about because he was gay.
He was actually the architect of the I Have a Dream speech.
Was he?
Absolutely.
He wrote that speech?
Yep.
Bayard Rustin.
But they kept him quiet. No, he didn't write the speech, but he was the one who said we should have this huge march on Washington.
He was so involved with planning the March on Washington. But why don't we always hear about him? Because he was gay. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, James Baldwin was gay also. So these two guys, James Baldwin and Bayard Rustin, they said what we should do in response to these little girls being murdered is we should wear black armbands. Simple black armbands like this all over the country. This is a symbol of grief when someone dies. And you can see it sometimes in old movies, you know, war movies. They'll be wearing a black armband. When someone dies, you can wear a black armband to express your grief. And so these two men said we should wear black armbands all over the country and have memorial services for these little girls. So that's what we did. In Des Moines, we had services, and that's the first time we learned about black armbands, the meaning of them. When I had just turned 11 then, that September, and we wore black armbands and had services for little girls who'd been murdered.
Now, there was a button, and the button had an effect on you as well and for your student activism. Can you explain this button that I have showing?
Well, it's because of these buttons, which black students, then the next year was also an amazing, important year for young people speaking up. It was mighty times, like now, when so many students were speaking up for justice and for peace and for racial equality, especially. The rights of young people in public schools really build on the efforts of students speaking up for racial equality. And so what happened the next year, that was called Mississippi Freedom Summer. And that year, 700 college students were called from all over the country to go to Mississippi to help register black voters. And they were called there by the heroes of our country, Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker and a man named Robert Moses. Well, Ella Baker is an amazing, well, both of them. Fannie Lou Hamer had already been beaten and jailed in Mississippi for trying to register to vote. And then Ella Baker, she started the group, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which is SNCC, SNCC, one of the most important organizations in our history, really, especially for youth. SNCC was a group of young people and some older adults who formed to really speak up against racial discrimination and injustice. And so that summer of 1964, SNCC called college students to come to Mississippi to help register black voters. And 700 college students went there. And when they got there, they knew they would be in danger. Well, that's the quality of young people, courage. And some of that is right in their brain chemistry. It's really interesting. As a nurse, I've studied the brains of teenagers. It's so fascinating. They have more dopamine, which makes young people more willing to take risk and courageous. And so these courageous young people went to Mississippi. They knew they would be in danger, but they went anyway. And as soon as they got there, 3 of them were murdered. James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner. Chaney, Schwerner, and Goodman. So news of this also went around the world, but their bodies were discovered August 4th, 1964. And that fall, black high school students in Mississippi wore these buttons to school to protest the murders. And they were told, oh, no, you can't wear those buttons to school. That's too controversial. This Tinker case is about controversy. And that was about controversy also. And the students said, we have to express these things that are so affecting our lives. And so they started a court case, which they won in Mississippi at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. The case is called Burnside. And the judges there in Mississippi at the Court of Appeals said they should have been allowed to wear those buttons to school. Why? Because they did not substantially disrupt school.
And that was the standard.
That was the standard. That is the precedent case for the later Tinker. I mean, there are other precedents that are part of Tinker also, but this might be the most important one because it set the standard for free speech in public schools today all over the country. You can have your free speech as long as you do not substantially disrupt school. So that case and those events and the struggle for voting rights are really at the heart of the later Tinker ruling.
Then the Vietnam War breaks out. And then as a result of that, it changed your direction of how you wanted to handle your life and become more active. So tell me
Absolutely. Well, in a way, it didn't actually break out. It was sort of planned, and it, developed, it escalated. What happened was, and this is just beyond belief, almost, the very same day that the bodies were discovered of the three young men, Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman, from Mississippi, who were killed in Mississippi. The very same day, August 4th, 1964, off the coast of Vietnam, a U.S. Navy ship claimed it was attacked, the USS Maddox.
And you say claimed for what reason?
Because it turns out it was not attacked. And I have an article that I like to show students. It's from the U.S. Naval Institute. It says, it is clear now that the U.S. government deceived the public and misled them about these events having to do with the USS Maddox. The war was already going on, but it was under the radar. Most of the American public did not even know where Vietnam was. They certainly couldn't find it on a map. They didn't know the history of the country, that it had been a colony of the French, and they didn't. It's kind of like now, I find, with what's going on with Gaza and Israel. Most Americans don't know the history of all of that. They just think that it's all started on October 7th. Even Congress members who I talk to in Congress, because I go there a lot, they say, well, this all started on October 7th. I'm thinking, no, this did not. It's like the Vietnam War. It didn't really start then. It was part of, a developing, set of events that happened that led to the escalation of the Vietnam War. Because in 1964, then, when this ship claimed it was attacked, within days, the U.S. Congress voted to send thousands more soldiers to Vietnam. And it was called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. So by that next year, then 1965, when I was 13 years old, well, by this time, my father was also working with the Quakers. So we were learning a lot about Vietnam. And also we were seeing it on the news, thanks to the free press. People like Walter Cronkite, they were covering the Vietnam War. You could see the body count. Maybe some of you remember this. The body count on the news every day. And it was very upsetting. It's like now, when students are watching, the killings and the horrible atrocities that are going on in Gaza, and that has become a center of my work also right now. But, you can't just turn away from that. I couldn't. And so we saw more and more of these horrors. And, as kids, it was Christmas time. My father would preach to us from the Bible the story of, the promise of forgiveness and love with the birth of the little baby in the manger, And people would send those Christmas cards that say, peace on earth. And us kids thought, yeah, why don't you all try it sometime? Peace on earth, instead of war and killing all the time. And that's the power of young people. You see through the hypocrisy. So many young people are today. And that was what was happening with us. So, we thought, this is not right. This is horrible. And the Vietnam War is known as a war of atrocity. There were so many horrible things going on. And I speak with people all the time, and students and teachers and others who have family in the war, had family in the war. And it's very emotional today. And so I have, also felt very strongly that we have to be able to talk about these things with respect for each other. But we can't just sweep them under the rug and censor things.
So who came up with the plan to wear the black armbands?
Well, the first real nationwide rally against the war was in November of 1965. And that was in Washington, D.C., and about 25,000 people attended. And my brother, John, was there, and my mother went. And a boy named Chris Eckhart and his mother, who was a friend of my mother's. And there was a group called Iowans for Peace. It's not like Mary Beth Tinker woke up one day and decided to speak up for peace. There was a whole group called Iowans for Peace. Probably in Wisconsin there was one too. And so the peace, effort was building. And so on the way back from this rally, a man named Herbert Hoover, not the president, but he was related to the president. He was a Quaker in Iowa. And people were talking about what we could do back in Des Moines when we get home. I wasn't there, but they were talking about it. And so, the idea of wearing black armbands came up. He said, what about black armbands? Maybe we should wear black armbands again to mourn for the dead in Vietnam. And this would be a way of speaking up about what's going on in the war. And so that's what happened. Some teenagers took off on the idea, and some of them were at Roosevelt High School. We had a group at our Quaker youth group that heard about it. The Unitarian youth group heard about it. Some students at various high schools heard about it. And so about 50 kids signed up to wear the black armbands.
And what happened when you wore the black armbands to school?
Well, a couple of days before we were going to wear the armbands, on December 16th was the plan, 1965. I was in 8th grade, 13 years old. A couple of days before that, the principals heard about it because one of the boys at Roosevelt High School wrote an article for the school newspaper. And so the principals heard about it, and they had a hasty meeting. They tried to keep it secret, but the press found out about it, and it came out in the paper that the principals made a rule against wearing black armbands. So now that was kind of interesting, too, because you could wear a black armband if you were sad about the football game. But no, not the war. You kids cannot talk about war. And that's why this is a youth rights case. And it falls within the area of children's law and youth law, really, and First Amendment law, because it's up to the person what issue they want to be sad about or talk about. If they want to talk about the football game, fine. If they want to talk about war, that should be okay, too. And that's actually called viewpoint discrimination. The government is not allowed to favor one issue or one viewpoint over the other. And that's one of the ways that we won the case, actually. But that's what happened. We decided to, wear the black. About 10 of us decided to go ahead and wear the armbands, even though we knew we could be in trouble. And my dad, he heard about it, and he said, no, I don't think you kids should be wearing those black armbands. Because he was kind of conservative, and he said, the principals have made a rule, and it's not easy being a principal. And I certainly know that today. I meet many principals and talk to many principals. And mostly, a lot of times, they do want their students to have a voice. But at that time, he said, the principals have said you shouldn't wear those black armbands. And I don't know you should just go and break that rule. But you see, kids are so persuasive. And we said, Dad, you taught us to speak up for our conscience. Because my dad felt very strongly about the conscience. He had some friends who had been killed in World War II. And he took us to their gravesite. And he taught us that if you don't speak up for your conscience, we could have the Nazis in charge. And I feel that way today. We have to speak up for our conscience. My dad was a real example of how to live a life of integrity. And yes, there would be risk, but that's what we told our dad. And so we brought him over to our side. Yeah.
So you show up. What happened that day? So you showed up
well,
that day?
Yeah, I was scared and nervous. I was the shyest kid you could ever imagine, and I was at Warren Harding Junior High School, and I had a little just plain black armband, and I went off to school. Before my brother, John, he was going to wear one too, but he decided, you know what, I think I'll wait a day or two. So here I was, heading to school, scared and nervous, and my friend Connie said, you better take that off, you're breaking the rule. And I said, but Connie, I'm really upset about the war, and I want to say something about it, because I was very emotional about the war. That's another power of young people, feelings, emotions. And so I went through the morning, no problem, and at lunchtime some boys were teasing me and saying, I want an armband for Christmas, and I just ignored them as always. But I got to my math class after lunch, and Mr. Moberly had a pink slip in his hand because he had spent the whole day before warning us that we could be in trouble if we wore black armbands to school. And it came out in court later that if anyone disrupted school, it was him. Because he spent the whole class period talking about black armbands the day before. So I knew when I got to Mr. Moberly's class, I'd probably be in trouble. So he was standing at the door, sure enough, with a pink slip. And I went down to the office, and I looked around the office, and I was scared. And Mr. Willitson was there, the vice principal. And he said, now, Mary Beth, that's against the rules. Take off that armband. Well, I looked around the office, and I looked at Mr. Willitson, and I said, okay, Mr. Willitson. And I was thinking, oh, whew, I'm glad that's over. As you could see, it wasn't over. Because I got suspended anyway. And so I learned a very important lesson that day, though. And I have to say, I tell students this lesson. You don't have to be the bravest person in the world. You can be scared. You can be nervous. You can be you. And you can even back down sometimes. And you'll be amazed at what you can even do, even under those circumstances. And that's exactly what happened to me. I was a scared little kid. I was nervous, but here I am today. I shouldn't really be with all of you today. Because the rule said if you refuse to take off the armband, you will be suspended.
And you took it off.
Exactly.
And so what did you do as a result of being suspended then?
Well, what happened for other kids over at the high schools, the boys, now some of them knew about civil disobedience. Chris Eckhart, he went straight to the office and he said, look, I'm wearing this black armband, I'm breaking the rule. He knew about it. They knew. So they were suspended. Four other kids were suspended. Chris Eckhart, my brother John, a girl named Chris Singer, and a boy named Bruce Clark were also suspended. And so, some people got really mad at us. And we got postcards with hammer and sickle on it in red saying we were communists. They threw red paint at our house. And my mom would say, we're not communists, we're Methodists. And again, that reminds me of the times we're living in right now again, because, I see all these students accused of being anti-Semitic for speaking up for Palestinian rights. They're not anti-Semitic. So many Jewish people that I am with who protest about what's going on to Palestinians in Gaza, West Bank, they're Jewish. They're not anti-Semitic, and I'm not anti-Semitic for speaking up about that. But back then, it was the same situation. If you dared to speak up for peace in Vietnam at Christmas time, you could be called a communist. Well, it's like so many people back then were called communists. I mean, Martin Luther King, all these Rosa Parks, all these people were called communists for speaking up for racial justice. And now it's happening again today. We're seeing that, accusation being used again today.
Last week we had Sister Helen Prejean
here,
and she said she was called a communist.
She was?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
so you're in good company.
I admire her so much, and I have to go back and hear her speech.
But you appealed that decision, and it went before the school board.
Yes.
And I think I have a picture of you. That's you and your mom at the school
My mom
board?
and my dad is sitting behind me, and there's one of the boys that helped plan, and I think that's Ross Peterson, and then Chris Singer to the left. I think she was the girl who was suspended also. Well, yeah, we tried to change the rule. We went to the school board. Well, the ACLU, the Iowa ACLU, offered to help us, and not everybody was mad at us. A lieutenant corporal in the Marines wrote a really nice letter to the editor saying these kids should have their rights. This is hypocrisy. And so the American Civil Liberties, the Iowa Civil Liberties Union was another group that came and helped us, a woman named Louise Noun. She kind of made it her cause there in the ACLU to help us. And so they offered to help us. And they said, now, first you've got to go back and try to change the rule. We don't just go to court if we can possibly avoid it. First, we want to try to negotiate. And I learned that lesson very well, and I like to pass that on to students also. We always try to negotiate. These problems mostly don't get solved in court, as it turns out. So anyway, we did go back to the school board twice and tried to change the rule, but they wouldn't change the rule. And so it went to court, and of course it was in federal court.
Yep. And before we go there, there's an incident that I want you to talk about. You mentioned the postcard you got that said that you guys were communists, and they painted the house red. You got a phone call.
Yeah.
Can you recall, at least let the audience know about that phone call?
It was kind of confusing as a child because here we were speaking up for peace at Christmas time. And so someone called me on the phone, a woman, and said, is this Mary Beth Tinker? And I just had picked up the phone, and I said, yes, it is. And she said, I'm going to kill you. And so I said, oh my gosh, these people are crazy. I mean, I knew about violent, crazy people because I knew about Birmingham. and I knew about Cheney, Schorner, and Goodman. So I knew these violent people were out there, but they hadn't really ever come after me personally until then. But yeah, I mean, that's a risk that you take, and it's always in the back of my mind. That is, there is a risk to speaking up about, a better world, a peaceful, just world. And that's a risk that people have been willing to take through history, and people are taking it again today. And I'm so impressed with some of these students today who are taking that risk again, losing their bachelor's degrees, and the professors too. And even the colleges. I saw today in the news where over 200 colleges have written a letter pushing back against the Trump administration's attack on universities. And so, yeah, there are risks that come with it. They are being threatened with a freezing of their funds, but that's what I learned back when I was a child. There is a risk, but it's so worth it to live a life speaking up for what you believe in.
Now, you mentioned, before I cut you off, I apologize,
No,
that you went to the district court. I'm trying to remember, was it Sullivan? Stevenson? Roy Stevenson?
Stevenson, yeah.
And what happened in front of Judge Roy Stevenson?
Well, that was very nerve-wracking because at the district court and federal court, you have to actually testify. Not at the appeals court or at the Supreme Court. So I had to actually take the stand. My brother, Chris Eckhart, there were 3 of us plaintiffs, and so we had to actually take the stand and say what had happened. And that was very nerve-wracking as a kid. But yeah, they ruled against us. And then it was appealed to the appeals court for Iowa, which is the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals.
But can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Do you think the fact that Judge Stevenson was a veteran had anything to do with that?
I'm not sure, because later on there were so many veterans that were against the Vietnam War. In fact, I think that's really what turned the tide in the war. So many veterans and active military speaking up against the war. And they started throwing their medals over the fence of the White House. And, so I'm not really sure how that... A lot of it had to do with disrespect for young people, I think. There's a general disrespect for kids and young people. And young people are discriminated against in our society. I'm a nurse. I've worked with young people, as I said, my whole life. So I really see it up close and personal that, kids pay the price for policies that are made by adults. And you're seeing right now, today, students, whose school lunches are being threatened and Medicaid is being threatened. And, we've got lead in the water in so many places, including Milwaukee. And I go to schools where the entire faucet is taped up because there's too much lead in the water. So I don't think kids have ever been a real priority in our society. And it was kind of like that then, because people were sort of like, these kids should shut up and sit down. They don't know anything. And that's kind of what's happening again today a lot of times, I'm sorry to say. But young people, there are these discriminated groups, as we know so well, and young people are one of those. So they're using their First Amendment rights, and they have through history, and this Tinker case is an example of that. We have a right to speak up and say what's good for us as kids, and that was kind of our message.
And so then you said you lost in Iowa and then went to the circuit court in St. Louis.
Yes.
Talk to me about that.
Yes, the circuit court in St. Louis, which is the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is where my actual armband is right now, in a display they have there for the First Amendment, because when I went back to school that Christmas time, I wrote a report for school. What did you do over Christmas vacation? Yeah, see, I figured out you can get credit for all this. And that's kind of how I got through college, too. Always do it about something you care about. And so I wrote a report, and I pasted my armband in there. And it's actually at the 8th Circuit right now in their little First Amendment museum. But the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, it was, they couldn't decide this three-judge group at first. And so it went to the en banc, which was 8 judges, which was split 4-4. And our young lawyer was so amazing, Dan Johnston, for the ACLU. And by the way, you don't pay anything for the ACLU lawyers, as you probably know. But which was handy because our family had no money. And so our young lawyer, Dan Johnston, he argued, well, these kids hadn't hurt anybody. They should have their First Amendment rights. They should be able to have free speech. And the school board lawyer said, but it's up to the school board to decide what gets talked about in schools. So it was split. That had the effect of affirming the lower court decision. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But it also helped because the Supreme Court thought it was an important issue.
Well, also, right around the time we lost at the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, over in the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals for Mississippi, the students won their case. The Burnside students who had protested the murders of Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman, the 3 young civil rights workers, the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals, they had won their case saying students should have a right to free speech in public schools as long as they do not substantially disrupt school. So now you've got the 5th Circuit saying one thing, and the 8th Circuit saying another thing about the same issue, students' rights in public schools, free speech rights. And so that's called a circuit split, as you know, Judge Mosley. And so a circuit split happened in the students' rights issue then. And so our young lawyer said, well, we're just going to have to let the Supreme Court decide this. And it was appealed to the Supreme Court, which only takes, then it took about 80 cases a year out of around 10,000. Now I think it only takes about 50 or so.
Yeah, if you're lucky.
A year. Yeah, I was talking to some students yesterday who had been at the Supreme Court with a big rally about the issue of banning books in schools. So yeah, it's still going on today.
And tell me, what happened in the Supreme Court?
Well, at the Supreme Court, again, the lawyers argued back and forth, and you can hear the oral arguments of these famous cases because of a man named Peter Irons, who got the recordings released. You can go to a website called Oye, maybe some of you already have, and you can hear the actual arguments in the case. But so they argued back and forth, and amazingly, on February 24th, 1969, the court ruled by 7-2, and in favor, not just in favor of us, but in favor of students all over the country, saying that schools should not be enclaves of totalitarianism, and that sometimes students have something to teach their teachers. And they said that, well, they added the word teachers. They also said it can hardly be argued that either students or teachers leave their constitutional right to expression at the schoolhouse gate. The decision is a very beautiful decision. It's written by Justice Abe Fortas. And it's a very strong ruling. People, Thurgood Marshall, William Brennan, Douglas. It was a strong decision for the rights of students in schools, public schools. Now, they did say all rights have limits because we have to balance our rights against other people's rights. And they said there are 2 exceptions. Number 1, students cannot substantially disrupt school. And they took the Burnside case as a precedent for that. You can have your free speech rights, but you cannot substantially disrupt school. But they added something that has been very harmful, actually, for students' free speech rights. They said, not only can you not substantially disrupt school, if the school predicts a substantial disruption, they will have the possibility of censoring it. So they kind of added that. So that was that you can't substantially disrupt school. And number 2, you cannot impinge on the rights of others.
And we call that the Tinker test.
Exactly.
Every law student in here probably knows that already.
Well, the Tinker, and now what does that mean? It's been debated ever since. And there are all kinds of cases, that rule various ways. Is a Confederate flag on your T-shirt impinging on the rights of others? Is a shirt that has a rainbow flag with a slash through it saying God is ashamed of your homosexuality, does that impinge on the rights of others? So, it's debated, and it still is today.
So, what have you been doing since?
Yes. Well, I had no idea this case was going to be so important. And I went on, and I was, I graduated from high school, and I became a nurse, and I didn't know how important the case was at all. I mean, you'd think I would have a clue. It's at the Supreme Court. But I didn't realize there were these landmark cases. And so then I was in nursing school, studying at the last minute, of course. Probably there's some students here with finals this week coming up. But I was studying at the last minute, my nursing exams, and the case was in my nursing book. So it kind of hit me, well, I guess this is a little more important than I thought. And I mean, I had, there had been reporters coming around. I knew it was a big deal. It was on the front page of the New York Times and in our local Des Moines paper and things like that. But I didn't realize this was going to go on and really define my life in so many ways. and the others is, and the funny thing was too, the reporters and others have kind of made Mary Beth Tinker the face of the case, and I always wondered why.
Where'd you get that name? That's such a great name.
I don't know why, but I mean, yeah, the face of the case is what it's all about. And, you know, I don't know what it was, but maybe because I was one of the youngest. I was the youngest that was suspended. My little sister, Hope, was in 5th grade. She wore a black armband also, but she wasn't suspended. And my brother, Paul, was in 2nd grade, and he wore a black armband to his 2nd grade class, and he wasn't suspended either. And they said, we want peace. But they weren't suspended. But I think maybe that's why, you know, reporters kind of honed in on me, and it was really stressful. And so I grew up, and I became a nurse. And then I started to see how I was a trauma nurse, as I said, with kids, teenagers. I started as an EMT, and then when I started going to school, I sort of couldn't stop. So I got 2 master's degrees, one in nursing and one in public health. And that's when I started really seeing up close and personal the conditions of young people, not only in our country, but in the world. And I put it together with our case, the rights of young people, and how young people need to have their, rights, and they need to have the First Amendment, and they need to have a way to advocate for themselves. What would make them happy? What would make their lives better? And that's really what the First Amendment is so handy for. It's a way of advocating for our own interests. And so I kind of put it together, the conditions of children, which are not good in our society overall in so many ways, I'm sorry to say, and the rights of young people. And so that's when I sort of put it together. I worked as a nurse for many years, and I left my hospital about 10 years ago, and I started traveling all over the country with an alumni from Marquette.
Yeah, that's how I found you, actually.
Yeah.
I said, who's this woman traveling in an RV across the country?
I know. Yeah, Mike Heaston, he's an alumni here. He graduated from the journalism school, and then he became an attorney. And he had this crazy idea. He was working for the Student Press Law Center, which is a group that advocates for student journalists. And he and I kind of came up with this idea together that we should travel around the country and encourage students to know their rights and to use their rights. And so that was about 10 years ago in 2013. So we traveled around in this huge RV, decorated in hot pink for the First Amendment, and it said free speech for students. It had balloons on it, painted on it, and it was really great. And we came to Marquette Law School in 2013, and we went to about 100 schools, conferences, social studies conferences, and student press conferences, because this case is also very connected to student press rights, actually. And so, yeah, that's what I was doing ever since.
And you lived in the RV.
Yes.
How many miles do you think you traveled?
We went about 25,000 miles, we figured. We would park in Walmart parking lots, and we would park in, school parking lots. And it was really great because the students, I remember, they would knock on the door, like high school students would come with coffee. Miss Tinker, we have your coffee this morning. And I just loved the students, and we went to so many schools, middle schools, and high schools, colleges, universities. It was really wonderful. So now I still speak with many students and teachers and principals and administrators around the country, but now it's mostly virtual. So I'm glad to be here in person with you today. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you for agreeing to come, because I know you do this virtually now.
Yes,
and so
mostly.
thank you for coming. What about the rest of your siblings? Are they engaged in this work as well?
Well, John does speak with students quite a bit. My brother, he was a plaintiff in the case also, along with Chris Eckhart. And a lot of students do projects for National History Day. About 10,000 students a year take part in that, and probably some of you and your family or students know about National History Day. So we talked to lots of students for National History Day. Some students just wrote to me and said, we won at the statewide level and we're going on to nationals, and I was so happy for them. And so John talks to a lot of students as well. But yeah, he lives in Missouri. Hope is a doctor now. Paul lives in Ann Arbor, and we still advocate for the issues that we care about: peace and justice and young people's rights. And we found that it's a way of life, and that's what I like to pass along to others too. It's a way of life. It's a good way of life. You don't always win, But speaking up for the things that you care about, it's a life of integrity, I feel. And yes, there are risks, but it's a good way of life.
What about your children? How do they feel about?
My child, yeah, I have a boy who's he's 44, and he works for the federal government and in sustainable energy. So he's at risk right now for his job, and he's speaking up about that issue. So, as you know, people all over the country are speaking up about that issue. I was at a rally actually at the Department of Education, because the Department of Education is under attack, and so many people are being, laid off from the Department of Education. So I was at a rally there a couple weeks ago. It was organized by college students around the area, and there's plenty going on today.
And you live in D.C.
Yes.
And so you're keeping up the advocacy work every day.
Yeah, live in D.C. I like to go down to Congress, the Senate, speaking up about so many things that are going on today. But as I said, mostly my eyes are focused on the genocide, and yes, it should be called a genocide, that is going on Gaza, the war on Gaza, and it is so unfair, and young people and older people all over the world are speaking up about that issue. And, as I said, sometimes it's easy to talk about things in the past, but we have to also connect it to the present day. And so I've been reading this amazing book by Omar El-Akkad. It's called One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This. Because that's what happens. In the future, people look back and they say, oh, yeah, that was terrible. We were against that, too. But now we have to look at the present moment and speak up in the present moment, and so many people are doing that. And is it controversial? Yes. But this case, Tinker versus Des Moines, it's about controversy. It says that we are going to have controversy in life, and we can't just sweep it under the rug. We have to talk about things, but we can do it with respect for each other. And that's my message to students and to others also, is that we have to talk about these things, but we can do it with respect for each other. And there are techniques we can learn and practice for how to do that, but we can't just censor things. We have to be able to talk about things with respect. And so that's what I, do when I talk about the issue of Palestine, Gaza, etc. I mean, as a nurse, a trauma nurse, I've just been heartbroken to see the kind of trauma that is being unleashed in Gaza and the amputations of the children. I had a photo, a conglomerate of so many of the children with their various amputations, and I was in a hearing at the House, U.S. House of Representatives, and I was showing this photo of there's over 1,000, that was about a year or so ago, over 1,000 children with amputations. And this is all with our tax money. The U.S. is funding this whole thing. Every single jet that bombs in Gaza is a U.S. jet. Every bomb, 500 pounds, 1,000, 2,000-pound bombs. And so I feel very, very strongly.
Entertain other points of view on this?
Yes, you can, we can.
We're going to take questions. Hold on a second.
Yeah, so that's what I feel. Is it emotional? Is it controversial? Of course. But as I said, that's what this case is about. It's about controversy, and that we have to talk about things. Of course, I talk about these things I respect, and I want to show you respect and others respect too, but I can't help but feeling very, very emotional about this issue right now. And as a nurse, the thing that hurts me also is that it takes away resources from children here in the United States. As we said, we spent about $20 to $30 billion in weapons to Israel last year. That's money our kids could use right here. We've got homeless kids, as you know. We have lead in the water in Wisconsin. They're saying they can't afford to fix the lead in the schools of Wisconsin. So we have so many issues for children and families right here in the United States. So it's all really connected in my mind. And
You willing to take questions?
yes, yeah,
Perfect.
yeah. Let's open it up.
We'll open it for questions.
Yeah.
Do we have a mic? Hold up a second.
Yes.
Thank you very much. In the 60s, when you were a child, and the point of this case, you wore literally your heart on your sleeve when you wore your armband. Can you please talk to your thoughts and opinions on how this case remains relevant in this age of social media, when our students are posting their thoughts and their feelings online?
Yes.
And how those thoughts and feelings then go viral and may be disruptive without the student ever planning on that being the case?
Yes, there was are you talking about social media and how it affects students' free speech today? And some of these big tech, people have been actually in hearings this year, and there was a big ruling actually by the European Union about the limits of social media, and it's going to affect all of our social media here in the United States too. But it's a huge thing, and there were 4 cases after ours. 3 of them cut back on the rights of students. One saying you can, these are at the Supreme Court, and they're all ACLU cases, by the way. One said you cannot have obscene speech with your free speech. That was Bethel versus Frazier. One said that you cannot, if it's school-sponsored, the school has more right to censor it. That was Hazelwood. And then there was the Morris v. Frederick case, which was in 2007, I think, which said that you cannot advocate for illegal drugs in public school with your free speech. Okay, then there was a victory for students' free speech in 2021 that had to do with social media. This girl, Brandy Levy, is also an ACLU case. It's called Mahanoy versus Brandy Levy. It was also an ACLU case at the Supreme Court. Brandy Levy had cursed her cheerleading program on social media, on Snapchat. And it got back to the school, which she apologized to the school. And I bet they wish they would have accepted her apology because the school district lost at every level. They lost at the district court, at the appeals court, and at the Supreme Court, the school district lost by 8-1. The only justice that voted against Brandy Levy was Clarence Thomas. Well, everyone knew that he was going to vote against her because he had said in the Morris v. Frederick case before that he doesn't believe students have free speech rights in public school and that Tinker should be reversed. Yeah, he's on the record saying that Tinker, the ruling should be reversed. So that's the social media case that was most recently, that was at the Supreme Court, and Brandy Levy won that one. But it leaves the door open for censorship still because, how much of your out-of-school speech gets into school and what degree does the school have to censor that kind of speech, et cetera. So the door is still a little bit open. Some of those questions are still unanswered.
Hello, thank you for coming here to talk. I do want to challenge there are many false statements you made about what's going on in the Middle East, and I agree with your right to say whatever you want to, but you have a captive audience here that we were not coming to hear a diatribe against Israel or against Jews. So you fully support...
Excuse me, wait, let's clarify. I'm not speaking against Jews. I'm speaking about the Israeli government and the U.S. government that is carrying on a genocide.
Okay. I reject your characterization of what's going on as a genocide unless you also talk about Hamas streaming across the border and murdering over 1,200 people, including babies, taking babies and families into hostage situation. There are still hostages in Gaza, and many people believe, including myself, that if Hamas were to just give over the hostages, that could end this war. But they are keeping those hostages to keep public opinion, such as yourself, against Israel. And so I think that is a perspective that needs to be recognized. Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, and the United States has had long support for them. Thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that. And yes, we do have a right to talk about these things. Personally, I don't believe that Israel is a democracy. I believe it's an apartheid state, and there is extreme inequality towards the Palestinians, and there has been for many years. And, I just believe that, almost as it says in here, I just want to read you a brief. Almost every day, an influential opinion columnist or think tank or spokesman for the President of the United States will feign outrage of how hurtful words such as genocide are, and occupation, and how disparaging and uncouth they are. Well, this is not an account of the carnage. No, it says, I have seen almost daily for months, and I have also, and I'm sure all of you have, images of children mutilated, starved to death, executed, bodies in pieces, parents burying limbs. But this is not an account of that carnage. though it must address it. This is an account of something else, something that for an entire generation of all manners of human beings from all over the world, something has changed during this season of preventable horror. This is an account of a fracture, a breaking away from the notion that the polite Western liberal ever stood for anything at all. So that's how I feel about it. And I'm sorry, what has happened for all the future bloodshed that it will be remembered as the moment when millions of people looked at the West, the rules-based order, the shell of modern liberalism, and the capitalist thing that it serves, and said, I want nothing to do with it. And I'm sorry, but that is the effect that all of this has had around the world towards our country, and I feel that it's very damaging, and that's my opinion. Is it controversial? I'm an advocate for children. I have to advocate for children all over the world. It's in my faith tradition. I went to nursing school at a Jesuit school, and that's where I learned that we have to speak up for what we believe in and for children all over the world. That health is not just physical health, it's also spiritual, psychological, and social health. That is my feeling about it.
We have another question.
Yes?
Thank you very much for being here. I'm kind of fangirling right now, so this is really awesome to speak to you. So the Tinker case talked about your right to free speech as a student in public schools. How do you respond to the topic right now, and especially the oral argument that just happened this week about parental rights and wanting them, students to not have access to information like LGBTQ topics? Is that not a right for the student to receive information in public schools?
Yes, and interestingly, the whole idea, the First Amendment, there was a big speech at Georgetown Law School actually last week, the week before, which I went to, and which is also a Jesuit university, as you may know, and the dean of their law school has spoken up very strongly against the threats by the Trump administration against them for trying to close down their DEI, issues. But anyway, at that one, the ex-head of the ACLU's law department, David Cole, said that, there is precedent in our courts that the First Amendment applies to everyone. Number one, you don't have to be a citizen. And the reason for that is because we need to hear the ideas of everybody. So the First Amendment is not only the right to speak, it's the right to hear things as well. So I think that's a big part of it. So as far as the LGBTQ issue and the banning of books in the United States, which is going on all over and there are some court cases going on right now. Oklahoma, New Hampshire, I think they just won a case. The students, Iowa, the students there have won a case, but it's still being appealed to some degree of how many books will or will not be censored there, et cetera. So, yeah, there was a case this week at the Supreme Court about the issue of these books and in Montgomery County in Maryland. And should the parents have a right to opt out when the LGBTQ whatever book is being talked about? Now, personally, I believe that LGBTQ issues should be discussed in schools and students, should have a right to talk about them. I have a little bit mixed feelings about the opt-out idea. Sometimes, as a trauma nurse, some things are traumatic, and in colleges also. Sometimes I think, students should be able to not hear about a traumatic, let's say you're going to have a discussion about sexual abuse in a college class. And some student doesn't want to be there because maybe they were sexually traumatized. I understand that as a trauma nurse. So I do have some understanding for that idea. Now, as a trauma nurse, I also have to remember in the back of my mind, not all parents do want what is best for their children. I'm really sorry to say that. But remember, I was an ER nurse at children's hospitals, and I worked on a trauma floor on hospitals. And so, let's be real. Sometimes the students should have a say about these things also, besides the parents. So I kind of live in the world of reality when it comes to, parents and students. And many parents do want their students to be exposed to LGBTQ books. Parents who don't, let's talk about it. That's how I feel. about it. We have to talk about these things with respect for each other.
Well, we are at time. I don't have time for another question, but I want to thank you for coming.
Thank you
Appreciate
so
you joining us. Can we
much.
give a round of
And
applause
thank you
to
to
Mary
all
Beth
of
Tinker?
you.